Today on TimesCast, world leaders arrive in Seoul for the G20 meeting, and many are criticizing U.S. economic policies. Nancy Pelosi will likely be the next House Minority Leader, but not all Democrats are happy about it. And Thursday night are the Grammys for Latin music. Questions about U.S. leadership of the global economy are expected to dominate this week's G20 meeting.
Graham, President Obama in Seoul, South Korea this morning kicked off the Group of 20 meeting with a message to the rest of the world. Stop complaining so much about what the U.S. is doing. Start buying more American goods. But is anybody listening to that message?
There's certainly a lot of squabbling and a lot of finger pointing. And President Obama, what he's done today is come back at his critics, which have been lining up over the last few days, Germany, Brazil, a lot of countries in Asia, which have been pointing fingers at the US. And he said, actually, it's up to you guys to start to adjust.
Now, look, there's a lot of reasons behind these tensions. We've got action by the Federal Reserve. We've got a weak dollar.
That's right. What we've got is a two-track world. You've got the US still growing really slowly. You've got China and large parts of Asia growing fast. And the US has tried to stimulate its economy past week with the Federal Reserve pumping billions into the financial markets, but that's made this divide even worse. It's pulling markets and countries apart.
So what's it going to take to diffuse these tensions? I mean, obviously one thing is a recovery, a solid recovery in the United States.
It's probably going to take both sides to adjust and to compromise. It is going to take America to start to grow again, and that will ease a lot of these tensions around the world. But China, too, it's causing a lot of problems in its own backyard, in its own neighborhood in Asia. It's going to have to start to adjust its exchange rate, we think.
Jeff, your story today was about Republican leadership and how there may be some changes. But what about the Democrats? That's not changing, it looks like.
It's not changing much, except Speaker Nancy Pelosi will soon be Democratic Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi. And that, in effect, changes everything. She has sold this to her members on one basic pitch. I will protect you from what is certainly becoming a more moderated White House as they try and work with Republicans.
But what about her toxicity? A lot of Republicans ran against Pelosi specifically in the election.
The White House does not think it's a great idea, sort of optically, that she would be sort of still viewed as a leader of the party. But one thing will be different. She will not be nearly as visible as Minority Leader. She will not be behind the president when he's giving the State of the Union address. A Minority Leader is very much sort of behind the scenes. So yes, she's still toxic, but the commercials 2 years from now will not be so-and-so voted with Nancy Pelosi 80% of the time. The next election will be much more about the president.
Now, what are their relationships with President Obama?
The relationships between Capitol Hill and the White House are frayed in some respects, fraught in some respects, and really they're going to be trying to figure out a new dynamic. Where do the Republicans fit into this? Speaker John Boehner, soon to be Speaker John Boehner, will be at the table for these conversations. So the relationships are not quite yet defined because there's going to be a new person over for dinner, if you will, and that is going to change the entire dynamic.
We join reporter Ben Cesario for a recording of Popcast, the Times weekly music podcast.
John Perellis, chief pop critic, is here to talk about the Latin Grammys.
Good to be here.
It's the 11th year. John, when the Latin Grammys started in 2000, there really was a lot of hope that this would help them reach a wide audience. Has that happened?
Not quite. I mean, back then, that was the era when Ricky Martin was on the American pop charts and Shakira was coming out, and everybody's looking at demographics and thinking, you know, America's getting more Latin. There's an entry here. It didn't quite happen. What happened eventually was that this Latin Grammy show was small fry on CBS. They switched to Univision, the Spanish language network, switched the language of the broadcast to Spanish, and became a very big fish on Univision.
Who's really going to clean up at the awards show this year?
Well, it's a toss-up. Alejandro Sanz, who had the most Latin Grammys until Juanes came along and beat him, has an album out. He's nominated in a bunch of categories. He could be the one. He's a big, romantic, leading man kind of pop star. Exactly the kind of pop star that they would love to give Grammys to in America if he sang in English. But there's a horse race because the other person nominated, who's got a bunch of Latin Grammys already, is Juan Luis Guerra. I like him better. He's kind of like the Paul Simon of the Dominican Republic. He's collected a lot of local rhythms. He's put them into a pop format. His lyrics can be really crazy and dreamy and poetic, so I'd be happy if he won too. But the wild card in the album of the year is Bebe, who's from Spain. Bebe won Best New Artist, and then disappeared for years. The big success with the spotlight on her so much that she just fled. I'd be happy to see her win too. I mean, these are good albums, and you know, if the Latin Grammys can expose them to people, can remind people that there's a world beyond English-speaking pop, I think it's a good thing. And turn on the closed captioning, watch the English, and you know, learn a little about music that's happening really vibrantly outside our borders.
John Perellis, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
To get the latest news on music, subscribe to the New York Times Weekly podcast. Join us again tomorrow for TimesCast.